Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pgoshnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs around the internet and more podcasts than we have time to name here. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, how many podcasts are you on now?
Not sure, but one of the great things about what you just said is that also one of them doesn't have a name yet. So,
if you podcast and the show doesn't have a name, did you really podcast?
Right? I don't even know if we have an RSS feed, so really it's just talking into the ether, which, how is that different, really?
I mean, yeah, Dusty and I did that for years, and people still occasionally gave us $3.50 just to kind of humor us, so... It works. I saw that you had something through Libsyn. Okay, well, that's somewhat legit. At least it's being sent through the normal channels. Speaking of podcasts, we are now on Spotify. Yay, Spotify. Originally, I had actually tried to get us on Spotify the day they announced that they were going to be allowing podcasts on it. And our provider was having a couple of issues with updating the RSS feed in order to operate inside of Spotify. But now that is fixed. We are now on Spotify. You are welcome to listen to our entire back catalog up to like episode 1, whatever, that's on there. Actually, I think it goes back to like 64 or something before we switched over to Libsyn. But you guys are more than welcome to head over to Spotify, listen there. It's also no ads, nothing out of the ordinary. It's just like the iTunes downloads, or just like the Stitcher downloads as well. So you guys are more than welcome to head over to Spotify. I'm really excited that that's working. They approved us. That is just one more way for you to listen to the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. Go team! If you listen to the show and enjoy it, if you would like to help the show continue on, there are a couple different ways you can go about that. You can donate via one or two different ways. You can go to paypal.me/Norse Code, and you can donate there. That's just a one-time donation. And you can also go to patreon.com/Norse Code. Patreon, as we touched last week, is going through a couple of changes. They have gone back and forth on a few things, so we don't have much new information to report on the Patreon front. We have noticed that a couple of you guys dropped off. We understand. If you guys would like to continue to donate, or would like to just do a one-time donation, you can do it at paypal.me/Norse Code. So, before we continue on with the show, through our donations, we are ad-free, and we have two donations to speak of real quick. We have a donation from Kyle Slabby, who donates to the cause, saying, quote, because I love you more than Brad Davis. He gave $1 more than Brad Davis did. So he just wanted to make sure that we knew that he loves us more.
I like the arms race dynamic that this creates.
Hey, if they're trying to...
strongly encourage it.
If they're trying to buy our love, I'm totally game.
I'm bought.
100%. Also, we have an anonymous donation, which is cool. If you'd like us to not mention your name and would still like to donate, we are still very okay with that. So thank you, sir, for donating to the show. We really do appreciate it. Money that is donated to the show helps us out quite a bit, helps us on the ad side of things, helps us with new equipment, helps with a little bit of extra money for the holidays. So again, anything you guys want to do is totally cool with us. Also, if you would like to just tell a friend about the show, feel free. We have a really good team, and we have a really good podcast. So we enjoy what we're doing, and we'd like to be continuing to do it. So please help us keep the lights on at Norse Code. Shilling aside, we lost in Carolina. We lost to the Carolina Panthers. But as we've done in the past, when we've had kind of a difficult to process loss, we turned to the mailbag to kind of round out the entirety of the episode. So we have questions ranging from our quarterback situation to offensive line to defense, and we also have our standard mailbag questions as well. So let's get into the first question, which was actually from our guest during the second show last week, Marxist Panther, who asks a phenomenal question. and that is, how does it feel to be subject to the Matt Kalil revenge game? I'll hang up and listen.
Yeah, I mean, Kalil didn't play all that well. Everson Griffin had a really good game, but he ended up with a win. Griffin ended up with a loss. So I guess Kalil probably ends up happy. Although my experience with reading Matt Kalil coverage in Minnesota is such that it's not really enough to keep him happy. In fact, I don't know that he'll ever be happy playing tackle. Remember, he wants to be a tight end. In this game, as Marcus Panther will point out, as he's been pointing out while we've been recording the show in Twitter threads, Matt Kalil had a lot of help in the game. A lot of tight end chips, a lot of running backs behind him to help in pass protection against Everson Griffin. One of the only times that they didn't, Everson Griffin dusted him with a spin move, which is something that he's been pretty good at for a little bit now.
We should include that image in the show notes. That was just brutal.
Yeah. It's awful. I love it. Because of how often the Panthers ran the ball, Griffin ended up just getting only 25 pass rushing snaps, which ends up, killing, his ability to consistently put pressure on the quarterback. But, he did end up with a sack and 2 additional quarterback hits for a total of 3 pressures on those 25 pass rushing snaps, which actually is not that bad given how often, he was the subject of chips and double teams and so on. I'm going to have to, I did a more in-depth review of the offense kind of earlier today, and hopefully I'll be able to write something about that. I'll have to take a look at the defense more in depth to see sort of what the magnitude of that is. Because generally speaking, the players who are chipped most often in the league are still only chipped on about 20% of their snaps. So if it really is something like, every snap, that would be pretty extraordinary. But he definitely did have a good game. And not only that, he was phenomenal in the run game. He ended up with 5 stops, which is just a tackle that constitutes a loss for the offense. And so that means, if the offense fails to get 40% of the required yardage to convert a new set of downs on first down, 60% on second down, and 100% on third down, those are all losses. And Griffin had solo tackles, I think, on all 5 of those run stops. So
it almost looked like by design, that's what Carolina was doing, was just rushing it in his direction.
Yeah, which is, you think, oh, that's a terrible idea. But then the other options are rushing it at Linval Joseph, who had 3 run stops by himself, or at Daniil Hunter, who was also pretty astounding in run defense. And so, yeah, you'd think, maybe that's the case. It wasn't until I think later that they broke out a read option game that went out for 60 yards, that was able to kind of avoid, what Griffin can do in the running game. I know some people have broken down that run. One way I know Charles McDonald, for example, has been doing a Twitter stream of a breakdown of that game. And he thinks that Everson Griffin was designed to crash on the running back, and that the scraping linebacker, in this case Anthony Barr, is meant to take on Cam Newton. So this is a common response to the read option. This is something that Stanford is actually pretty well known for. And scraping the linebacker over the top and predefining the read for the defensive end, super common response. I am not confident that that's what happened. Sam and I took a look at that play after the game. Sam Ekstrom and I, my colleague at Zone Coverage. And I think Everson was actually meant to read, and he chose the wrong read. So, whatever. Andrew Sandeo obviously screwed up. But yeah, I would say overall, Everson Griffin actually had a really, really good game. In part because Matt Kalil was not very good, especially as a run blocker, which is why Everson Griffin was able to be so dominant as a run defender.
Now, Vikings Twitter exploded after this game for numerous reasons, but one in particular was the claim that Matt Kalil spent most of the game holding and was not called. I thought that there were some instances in the backfield where there's some pretty obvious holds not called. I didn't actually see any from Kalil aside from one, which I think I don't remember, but may or may not have materially impacted the play. But it's not something that I saw as like a persistent problem. So maybe, but like I don't know. That's not something that like I remember being a concern of mine. Again. I've done a more in-depth offensive review than an in-depth defensive review. Right. Let's go to Jason Brown, who asks, now that Pro Football Focus has said Case had one of his best games of the season, will Arif apologize for slandering our QB on Twitter?
So Jason Brown has been doing this ironic I love Case Keenum thing on Twitter for like a month and a half now. I'm not sure, but he's so weird about it. But yeah, no, I think PFF is wrong on this one. And I can kind of understand sort of where they're coming from. So in order to kind of recheck my criticism after the game of Case Keenum, which went on for hours on Twitter because people kept kind of, pushing back and engaging with it and stuff like that. I did a video capture of all his passes separated by drives and how those drives ended. There are some individual drives where I think I probably didn't give Keenum enough credit. So, for example, the 2-minute drive at the end of the first half was actually a pretty stellar drive. He did a really, really good job on that drive.
And so much better than last week's. Just miles.
Last week's end of first half 2-minute drive was awful. It was pointless. Why was he taking the passes he was taking? They were giving it to him for a reason. He was not aware of the clock or anything regarding the situation. But this last week it was a really, really good, stellar 2-minute drive. And I think that's something that I've kind of wanted to see from him for a while, because it's kind of one of the advantages, that Bridgewater has, that we know that he can do that. So that was really good. And he definitely deserves credit for that. But I think, what's kind of weird is when you start the game off with an interception, I think people, it's easier to forget about it. So that first interception, I don't think a lot of people are really thinking about it when they're thinking about Case Keenum's game. Whereas if it happened in the middle of the game, I think a lot more people would remember that. And it was just as costly. I think it led directly to points. I think that first interception led to, was it 3 or 7? I don't know.
Well, and just as a matter of just discussion, people are much more likely to remember the fumble with a spiral right now than the opening fumble or the opening pick.
And I kind of understand like not dinging Keenum for it. I think that he deserves kind of like a slight demerit for like not reacting appropriately to pressure. But I get it. I don't get the refs called it wrong argument. I think that was called correctly. He was no longer gripping the ball as his hand was moving backwards. He moved his hand forward and batted the ball forward. And people are like, yeah, I've never seen a fumble travel 10 yards. And it's like, can you hit a volleyball 10 yards? You can. Like, it's not surprising to see someone shot put a ball 10. That's all Phillip Rivers does. Like we've seen that you can shot put a ball. Sometimes it'll have a spiral. Things that shape have a tendency to wobble, and those wobbles can turn into spirals. And it was a wobbly spiral. So it was correctly called, and I can understand like saying, hey, the trajectory of the pass or whatever you want to say about it, that's not, his fault. And so we shouldn't like think of it as an interception, but we should think of it as a fumble because it was caused by an increasingly rare instance of poor pocket presence. He's been really good about pocket presence over the past, 5 or 6 weeks, and has been really good at avoiding sacks for the entire season, obviously, except this game. But yeah, I mean, like 6 sacks, a lot of it obviously has to do with the offensive line, and that pressure came quicker than most pressure. So you expect a higher sack conversion rate, but still 6 sacks, a lot of that's on the quarterback. And I think that while if you were to apportion blame, Riley Reiff kind of deserves a lot more blame than Case Keenum, but that's not to say, Keenum couldn't have reasonably been expected to do better on that throw. So yeah. But yeah, a lot more people remember that. And, it's easier to remember like a source of a grievance, right? Than it is to remember like the first, throw of the game or whatever, or the first drive, where it really feels like it didn't have a huge impact on the outcome of the game because, it's a low leverage down. It's like the first friggin' drive. So, you have a lot of time to make up for that mistake. Whereas, if it happens near the end of the game, like the Stephon Diggs interception, that's much easier to remember. And people were arguing about that. And it was kind of funny because like, I had mentioned sort of all of these things about, Keenum's game that week that day that I thought, were problems. And, people like there was a contingent of people, and I assume they're not, anything bigger than a relatively small minority, but there's definitely a contingent of people that are not blaming Keenum for that interception, or at least want to blame Diggs more for it, which I also find kind of astounding. But yeah, it's I don't know, it's interesting. Like if you break down Keenum drive by drive, there's a lot of like really bad stuff, and a lot of really good stuff. And so you could say maybe it's a volatile game, and if you remember the good stuff a lot better, that drive that ended with two Adam Thielen essentially screw ups, kind of screw up on that last one, but two Adam Thielen screw ups and Kyle Rudolph near catch in the end zone. Yeah, I mean, that was a really good series of throws from Keenum. That second throw to Rudolph wasn't perfect or anything like that. And, there's room for criticism on it. But it was like an average throw, and Rudolph probably should have reeled it in. Pretty amazing play from Mike Adams. Thielen got, hit on the numbers and, should have been a touchdown. That's fine. So you remember that, and you remember the 2-minute drill, and those were just astounding drives. And if he had been average for the rest of the game and only had those two astounding drives to go with it, yeah, then he would have had a good game. But he didn't have two average drives. He threw an interception at the beginning. He didn't have the pocket presence to avoid, a couple of sacks that I thought were avoidable. He throws another interception near the end of the game, in a really high leverage situation that I thought was his fault. And kind of one of the themes that kept coming up in this game, or in the post game sort of criticism, was, it's not Keenum's fault that they lost, which I think is a separate discussion. Because if first, blame is kind of just like to apportion blame is just a really difficult thing to do, because I think that if Keenum had played better, like an above average, 10th-ish in the league quarterback that, the statistics indicate that he should play at, they would have won the game, right? Does that mean it's his fault? I mean, probably not, because it's more reasonable to expect the defense to play better than they did than it is for Keenum to play, that much better than he did, kind of given sort of like a confluence of factors. So maybe it's, more the defense's fault. And, hey, Keenum did get dealt a difficult hand with the way the offensive line was performing. And so you should,
being hot swapped out.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's a very geeky term to use there.
I'm proud of that one. Yeah.
But yeah, and the offensive line was not as configurable as you thought, and so the hot swapping wasn't quite good. Kind of messed up a SATA 3.0 cable. But
if we use the phrase hot swap one more time, it becomes an episode title, and it's going to be like our listeners are going to be very confused when they Google it, and not safe for work things pop up. We're not talking about that. I promise. Probably.
Probably. But yeah, and the offensive line did a really poor job, and they allowed pressure on something like 40% of his snaps. And that's a huge problem. And you should give Keenum a lot of latitude in that respect. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that after you do that, there's still a lot of problems that pop up in the game that allow you to say, I don't think that he played well. And so it's weird because people are bringing forth kind of like a lot of, I don't want to say excuses, because excuses kind of imply that you genuinely think, some things need to be excused, and I'm not sure that they think that. I think that they think I'm just overlooking a thing. But they're, applying a lot of like confounding factors to inability to evaluate his game. And I'm not disagreeing that those things are true. I'm just saying that even after you account for them, I think that he had a poor game. One of the things that people brought up is that, kind of officially, unofficially, he had 5 drops in the game. So PFF had him with 5 drops. The Fox News broadcast had him dealing with 5 drops. And that's true, but I think that that's only important in the context of correcting for what the statistics are, right? And they're not important in the context of kind of evaluating throw by throw, because you would already have evaluated those throws as either good or bad based on their own merit and not whether or not the receiver necessarily had the ability to catch it. But another thing I think that people are kind of forgetting is that they're saying, yeah, there's 5 drops, there's 5 drops. 2 of those drops were good, or should have been good. It would have been better if they were incomplete passes. One of them was to Jerick McKinnon, where he drops the ball 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and he was surrounded by 3 players. He didn't want to drive. He was clearly trying to catch it. I'm not saying McKinnon made a super savvy move to drop it and turn it incomplete, although that does sometimes happen with players in screen passes where they drop a ball that they know is not going to turn into additional yardage, but that would have resulted in negative yardage. The other drop was that Diggs, interception, where if Diggs had just kind of alligator armed it and chose not to try and catch it, it would have probably been better. But he tried to catch it because, that's obviously. And because he had to just essentially stay still, on the lateral plane of the field and not move forward while he was trying to corral in this ball, defenders who were 7 yards away had closed in on him. And so if it had just been an incomplete pass, that would have obviously been better than if it had been a complete pass, or even better than that interception. So it's not like all of the drops were otherwise good plays. A couple of the drops, the Adam Thielen drop, obviously, the Kyle Rudolph drop, obviously, if those had been caught, that would have been better. But 2 drops is 2 positive drops is not that different from what most quarterbacks have to deal with in a lot of games. And so that's not a huge qualifying factor to me. And it only really matters if you're evaluating him on his completion percentage. And even after you adjust for that, if you adjust accuracy for drops, like PFF tends to, it's a above average accuracy, but it's not a stunning accuracy. And having a merely above average accuracy while not throwing the ball downfield, that's not that impressive. It's good to be above average in accuracy, but if you kind of adjust accuracy for kind of distance thrown, not that big a deal. And there were a ton of instances after I kind of rewatched the game. I didn't notice this live, otherwise I would have mentioned it. There were a ton of instances where you had open receivers kind of moving downfield again that he chose not to target. The best example was actually Tony Romo kind of pointed it out without meaning to point that specific thing out. He was intending to talk about the way that the Panthers kind of rotated their coverage to cover the out route to Jarius Wright. And Adam Thielen had run a streak to clear it out. But so that's called the dagger route combination. It kind of looks like a dagger. But yeah, it has an out route crossing underneath and a go route up top. And because of the way the Panthers kind of switched their cornerbacks, so they had the outside receiver or the inside receiver cover Adam Thielen, who was on the outside, and the outside receiver crashed down. It's sort of a trap coverage. And I'm not saying the Vikings fell for the trap. That's just kind of the name of the coverage. Adam Thielen was wide open, and there was acres of space because there was no safety up top. There wasn't. Adam Thielen was wide open, one-on-one coverage. The guy was 3 yards behind him. Adam Thielen even did the Randy Moss throw my hand up. He was wide open, and Keenum didn't target him, and that was the most egregious instance of it. But there was a bunch of instances of it, and so it's Keenum had some really wonderful drives, but he had a poor game. All of the turnovers, were his fault, to varying degrees, right? Again, the fumble was more Riley Reif's fault than his, but he could have accommodated it. And the Diggs catch or the Diggs interception, part of it is Diggs' fault, but he had 3 turnovers for which, he reasonably could take, a good chunk of credit. And you could argue that there should have been a 4th turnover on the Captain Munnerlyn Stephon Diggs underthrow. Maybe not. Maybe, you're not as kind of harsh with interceptable passes as someone like Kean Fahey is. But there was a couple of pretty bad underthrows in the game. And, you can say, hey, Adam Thielen shouldn't have dropped that pass in the end zone. And that's true. But you should also say, hey, Case Keenum had acres of space, not acres, but a ton of space to throw Stephon Diggs open in the end zone, and he didn't. And it ended up being incomplete, and I believe that drive ended in a field goal. And so you take one away from what he should have had, and you can point out one that he absolutely should have had that he didn't throw well enough for. So, also, the last thing I want to say on this thing is people keep on saying that Adam Thielen dropped 2 touchdown passes as if Case Keenum should have 2 more touchdowns added to his stat box. But that's not, they happened on the same drive.
I was going to say, they happened on the same drive. That wouldn't have actually, counted. It
you can only add one of them. You can only add one of them. So yeah, and if you add a touchdown to his box score and count the fumble as an interception or something like that, because I think all turnovers should count as turnovers, he still ends up being a net negative for the team. And if you add all of the yardage from the drops, yeah, you get like 10 more and a touchdown from Adam Thielen. You get 20 plus from Rudolph, and you get like a minus 7 from Stephon Diggs and Jerick McKinnon, and it's and I think there's a Jarius Wright one too. You're not adding that many yards, and so his once you adjust for all the sacks and turnovers and stuff like that, he ends up with a significantly below average statistical grade, even if you give him all the drops. So he didn't have a good game. He had 2 really brilliant drives, some really short drives that were punted or intercepted or whatever that are his fault, and a couple of average drives. So it's, I don't know, I get why it's easy to say that he secretly had a good game, even though the statistics don't show it. That happens all the time. I think it actually happened to Cam Newton in this game, but I don't think that that's an accurate assessment of what happened in this game.
It just seemed like one of those games where nothing was going right, and it just kept going. You'd have just like moments of brilliance. Like in the first quarter, I watched that drive for a touchdown, that response for a touchdown, and I had the thought to myself, I could probably get used to watching Case Keenum for the next 2 to 3 years as our quarterback. And then the rest of the game happened. But you have that moment of, oh, that's right, we can punch back. We are a team that is actually able to punch back. And it's really fun to watch us like, okay, well, we're coming back, and we're, it'd be nice if we didn't try to spot every team 7 points. But, we were able to actually accomplish something. But man, it was just rough.
Yeah.
Let's go to Ben Balzer's question, who says, the Vikings have been phenomenal about not giving up sacks this year, but somehow gave up 6 on Sunday and 2 last week. Is this A, regression to the mean, B, too many offensive line injuries, C, the Panthers' defensive line and or secondary is that amazing, D, teams have changed the way they bring pressure against Case Keenum, E, other?
Probably A through C. I don't think there was a change as a result of how teams brought pressure to him or anything like that, and I don't think there's another explanation I can come up with. So A through C, which I think, the offensive line gave up way more pressure than they usually do. And they've been a little bit above average. Not amazing, despite kind of the sack rate given up, but a little bit above average in terms of pressure given up. And they gave up a ton of pressure in this game. So that definitely contributes to it. The more pressure you give up, the more likely you are to give a sack. Also, the Panthers' defensive line played just astoundingly well, and they've got a bunch of talented people. Julius Peppers has been good all year. Mario Addison is their sack leader. He's been doing all right. Kawan Short is having a near elite season at defensive tackle. No one's really talking about it because there's a ton of, amazing interior defenders. Geno Atkins is having, I'm not going to say a revival season, but, one of the best seasons he's had in years. Aaron Donald is Aaron Donald. Damon Harrison's having an amazing season as a nose tackle. And, of course, there's Linval Joseph. But Kawan Short is actually he's up there. And so, those players are astounding, and they had a great game in large part due to their individual talent and effort. But also the offensive line was injured and poor and gave up a ton of pressure. But I think the third factor is, regression to the mean. And I'm not saying that one of the kind of fallacies about the way that we talk about regression to the mean is, A, we tend to only talk about it negatively. We don't very often talk about players regressing upwards to the mean. And that happens, obviously, just as often. So that's an important thing to note. The second is that a lot of times when people talk about regression to the mean, they think the mean is the league average of whatever skill or statistic that we're talking about. And the mean is actually just the true mean of that player's ability to produce that skill or statistic. And Case Keenum's true mean, I suspect, is much better in terms of the ability to avoid pressures from turning into sacks than it is. are much better than league average, right? And so I think, his true mean that he would regress to is still above average. But I do think that he is avoiding sacks at an unsustainably high rate. And being, it's very rare that somebody who's the best in the league at something, particularly if it's kind of the first time we've seen it, but just generally speaking, it's very rare that somebody who's the best in the league in a statistic for 1 year is the best at that particular statistic or skill. And there've been like dozens of like statistical papers published on this. Like one really good example is if you do our Premier League table, just a fake one where all 22 soccer teams play each other twice, and they're all equally good in this. They have a 50% chance of winning and losing, and you eliminate the possibility for draws because who cares? You'll end up with a distribution where some random team is at the top and some random team is at the bottom, but we know because of the inputs that they're all equally good. If you change one of those teams to, winning like 65% of the time, which I think is, pretty astounding. Like that's really good in a single season for a soccer team. That team rarely ends up as the top team. It's some random 50-50 team that ends up at the top team. That holds true even when you change it to like 75%. The same I think is kind of true in this case where Case Keenum is at the top of the league in this statistic. And I think, converting only like 1% of your pressures into sacks is just it doesn't happen at a consistent basis. So we saw regression in the mean there happen a little bit. At the same time, we saw a lot more sacks come into play. So yeah, it's it's a combination of those factors. I don't think Carolina changed their pressure packages versus what most people do to try and pressure the Vikings. I think they just kind of did normal stuff.
Yeah. Jake Adams asks, is the run defense a sneaky liability?
I don't think so. Those two runs were pretty bad, obviously, in terms of what they gave up. I still haven't really diagnosed that first one. I've been thinking about it and I've looked at it and I don't really have a good answer. Charles McDonald, who I mentioned was tweeting about the game, thinks that Kendricks overshot the gap, which is one of the likely kind of explanations that I come up with, which is fair. I thought, Kendricks switching gaps because of the pulling guard made a lot of sense, and Anthony Barr kind of followed him. But the two people to the left of Kendricks to the right of the play, it felt like they weren't aware that that's what was happening. I don't know. Who knows? Either way, a gap assignment problem that led to a 60-yard touchdown. That hasn't really happened very often for the Vikings at all. The second one was that read option error I talked about earlier with Griffin and Sendejo and whatever. Those things just don't happen very often for the Vikings, and there's a reason that they led the league going into this week in having the fewest explosive plays given up. It's because they just don't do that. Generally speaking, the Vikings have been very good on the ground. They're top half in the league in yards per carry allowed. And I think that they're top 10 in run DVOA allowed, which is a more accurate measure of run defense. If not, my mistake. But just generally speaking, I thought the Vikings have done a good job kind of bottling up the run. If you take those two runs away, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, because the Vikings defense had a bad day, and the reason that they played poorly, the reason that we know that they played poorly is because they gave up those two runs. But in terms of projecting forward, is this going to continue to be a liability? You take those two runs away, and the Panthers averaged 2.8 yards per carry. And that's with Christian McCaffrey, we thought, was running well. The Vikings did a fantastic job stopping the run on most plays. On a play-by-play basis, they stuffed the run just dramatically. And they've been pretty good against the run kind of all year. So I don't think it's and last year it was a liability. The Vikings weren't very good at stopping the run. But this year they're pretty good at it. So I don't think it is.
No, it just seemed like a couple of big plays just kind of snuck through, which kind of leads us to our next question by Christian B, who asks, give us an alternate universe scenario where the Vikings win this game, starting with the Sendejo interception.
So everyone wanted Sendejo to cut to the sideline instead of cutting inside, and I actually have not watched a replay of that, so they may be right. At the time when I watched it, I thought it was a little unusual, but I figured he had a reason. And it didn't seem so unusual that I was like, what the hell are you doing, dude? But yeah, so he runs that back, and I think the Vikings settled for a field goal on that drive. Because was that the dropped touchdown drive? Man, I don't know. But they only ran 3 plays. It started with like a Latavius Murray run, and then it couldn't have been the drop touchdown drive. So they ended up settling for a field goal instead of a touchdown. And do I need to like go into more detail? I mean, the Vikings like didn't lose by very much. Like that's a 4-point swing.
You see, looking at that game, not to kind of go in depth on a Bill Simmons idea, but it's a time-tested thing. If you play enough Madden games in a season, that eventually you play that one game where the computer goes, "No, you're not going to win this. I don't care what happens. You're not going to win this." And so all the dumb stuff starts happening. Your guys start dropping more. You get called for more penalties. You're not getting to the quarterback anymore. Just your quarterback is all of a sudden incredibly erratic and plays like Jay Cutler on every day that's not tonight. Like, it's just weird. And I feel like
if you load your previous save, same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the game says no. You're done here. And I get the feeling that that's the sort of situation that happened here. Is we had a lot of things happen that seemed way outside the norm that we haven't seen all year. The injury bug started to catch up with us. Kind of our receivers weren't bailing out the quarterback or vice versa. Like, it was just some dumb stuff just kept on happening, especially the penalties. So I feel like you could play this game 10 times, and I'm not sure what the result would end up, or if it would be much different after the 10th game. This was the game. This was the Xbox saying no.
Up. Yeah, the algorithm of the universe would correct for, say Sendejo running that in for a touchdown.
Yeah.
And something else would happen. But, if, ceteris paribus, all those things being equal, right? Sendejo runs that touchdown in, the Vikings stop the read option play at the very end, they win by 4. So, yeah, I mean, like, that's because I think the read option play may have happened on 3rd down. I don't know. They had the Panthers on 3rd down somewhere on that drive, I'm pretty sure. They stopped the read option play because, Barr doesn't set to the outside or Sendejo tackles him. One of those two things happens. And then they win the game by 4 points. Yay! Those two things. That's all it took.
So next question is from Nick Olson, kind of wrapping up the game, asks, what aspects of this game bode well or poorly for the team on a going forward basis? How much of our failures can be downplayed because Carolina is such a high variance team and such a unique matchup?
So I wrote kind of before the game that, the Vikings have been up against a variety of offenses and a variety of quarterback types, but they still haven't played against Cam Newton this year or anything resembling the kind of offense that Carolina provides. And one of the reasons, like you mentioned, is that it's a high variance offense. And they played at the high end of the high variance in a lot of respects. I think Cam Newton played brilliantly. I think he only passed for 5.5 yards per attempt, but he himself, I thought, played very well. I think that, that a lot of that kind of plays into kind of evaluating the Vikings' chances going forward. But it does, kind of highlight some of the areas that the Vikings, need to work on. Maybe they need to be a little bit tighter when it comes to, designating sort of what the assignments are on read option, because, they could very well go up against, read option type stuff in the playoffs. Say if they go up against Seattle, I wouldn't actually be surprised if the Rams did it with Jared Goff. Maybe they see the Eagles with Nick Foles. I mean, Foles did run read option stuff in Philadelphia with Chip Kelly, so just kind of funny. But maybe, but it's definitely something you have to think about. And, kind of whatever happens in the AFC, maybe it's a possibility, especially because, I don't know, the Patriots are bad now. Who knows? But it's something that maybe we'll have to work on. But for the most part, I think it's mostly good things. Play by play, the Vikings were more, quote unquote, successful, than actually even they usually are. And that's a really high degree, having a really high success rate. It just so happened their failures were explosive and at catastrophic times. And so when they did fail, they failed hard. And that you could say, hey, maybe, that's something that'll sustain itself, but all the evidence we have suggests that it won't. They also happened to fail on, sort of third downs that were in the red zone. They were above average in third downs in this game. They did a pretty good job of forcing fourth downs, but when they failed, it just happened to be when the Panthers were in the red zone. The Vikings are a very good red zone defense, top 3 in the NFL entering the game. in preventing red zone possessions from. I say top 3, that means third. At preventing red zone possessions from turning into touchdowns, and they didn't. So yeah, Xavier Rhodes balled out. Trey Waynes had a good game. Harrison Smith, I think, had only 1 or 2 mistakes. It's Linval Joseph had the defensive line had a great game. The linebackers played poorly, and that's something to keep on sort of watching out for, especially with Eric Kendricks. But yeah, I don't think that there's a ton there that we kind of didn't already know about the team, and it's just the stuff that they failed at is not stuff I suspect that they'll continue to fail at. I think Cross Horrific actually just tweeted this out not too long ago. The failures for the Vikings in this game are specifically where their strengths lie, and I don't think those have evaporated or anything, so they should be fine.
No, it wasn't just an outlier of a game, just an odd experience, and at least I've been thinking that we needed to lose one before the end of the season anyway, just to kind of reset a few things. So if we're going to lose one, we might as well lose this one, and people were kind of half expecting it, considering it's super hard to win 3 road games like that. So
yeah, no, and before this 3 road game stretch, people asked like, how many do you think the Vikings will win? I think a lot of people, including me, said they'll go 2-1, and I don't know which one the one is. Well, it's that one. Yeah.
So, but we move on. We have the Bengals coming to town, so we get to roast on them and just kind of take it day by day. So let's go and talk about the other big news in the league. Which is the injury to Carson Wentz, to which I feel the need to ask, has anyone checked on Prince Harry to see if he is feeling any sympathy pains from his twin losing his ACL? Just feel like we need to check on that. Taco Mango Boom, with a fantastic Twitter handle, asks, great. Does Minnesota have the highest Super Bowl chance in the NFC, presumably, after Wentz's injury?
I think so.
A lot of people on ESPN seem to think so. So that immediately makes me want to question it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, then they'll probably catastrophically fail. The best people to ask are actually the best person to ask is probably Eric Eager at Pro Football Focus, because he's developed a model that's very player specific. So a lot of the models that we have, like ESPN's FPI Football Power Index, 538's ELO, DVOA with Football Outsiders, although not as much them, more the first 2 I mentioned. And the simple ones, obviously, like, opponent adjusted point differential and stuff like that. Those evaluate the team as an aggregate kind of unchanging unit. And they don't account for things like player injuries. And one of the things that Eric Eager developed at Pro Football Focus that's kind of rolled out this year, that's the last I checked, which was a couple weeks ago, been astoundingly good against the spread, is a player-specific model where it weights positions based on their contributions or likelihood of affecting the outcome of a game, their contributions to winning. And then you plug in the player grades that the players have earned over the course of a year, and for both teams, tell them if it's home or away, and you'd probably other effects like weather and if it's a dome or not. I'm not quite sure, but probably other effects, and you get it spits out like an expected point differential. You can do that kind of for the rest of the season, and one of the advantages to the system is you can pull out a player like a quarterback like Carson Wentz and put in another player with a projected PFF grade for the season, and you see how kind of the rest goes. It's kind of like the Madden simulator. I don't know if he's kind of projected what this means, and if he's published a projection, you should kind of bother him with direct messages or something. I think it's at PFF_Eric Eager. Maybe not. You'll find, if you just type in Eric Eager into Twitter, you'll find it. But yeah, and see what he has to say. But yeah, I would imagine that the Vikings are probably the favorites. Now, if we assume that Nick Foles is nothing like his 2013 self and more like, his 2015 self, I think, which is a difficult assumption because in 2015 he played for Jeff Fisher, and we know that Jeff Fisher is a quarterback killer. Yeah, right? Like
garbage. Wait, as it turns out.
Actually, I'm kind of curious about this. What if Jeff Fisher is kind of like Mike Singletary in that they are the crucible, right? And so they make players suck, but they get much better later.
Are you kind of? I was gonna say, you're gonna use that reference, and I was gonna use Good Luck Chuck, and that then their next coach is the one who like leads them to the promised land. I'll choose something a lot less highbrow. A lot less highbrow.
You don't need to know the Crucible. You just have to know that crucibles are trials by fire, right? Because that's what it originally means is, put a hot iron into a crucible. It's trial by fire. So what if they make players suck so hard while they play for them that they actually get better than they would have been had they never gone through the Jeff Fisher experience? So what if Foles is even better than his 2013 self because he went through the Jeff Fisher experience? It happened to Case Keenum. It happened probably to Jared Goff. I guess we can't prove that.
No, sadly, we cannot. No, that's a horrifying thing to think about, and I don't want to think about it. So we're going to move on to the next question from Eric Sandgren, who asks, the second seed is more important now that the Eagles are weaker and more likely to be knocked out, or at least a game in Philadelphia doesn't seem as difficult anymore. Am I right?
Yeah, actually, yeah. Securing the second seed might essentially be the same as securing home field playoff advantage for the rest of the right, because they rejigger it after that's a new rule, I think, after it was implemented 2013 2014 where they reseed everyone essentially after the first round and the second round. And so if Philadelphia gets knocked out in the second round, which seems pretty likely or possible at this point, although I shouldn't say quite that, because it's not like Aaron Rodgers going out for the Packers, because the Eagles are an extraordinarily well-constructed team. And so they'll be kind of dangerous regardless. So we should point that out. Like, they've got a fantastic defense. Their offensive line has been doing really well, although Carson Wentz, I really hate saying this, Carson Wentz has made them look a little better because he can just shake off sacks. But, they have Nelson Aguilar is a surprisingly good receiver. Alshon Jeffrey now has a lot of money, which, maybe that means he's a good receiver. They've got a really great defense and some really good pieces on offense. So it's not going to be like they're clearly going to get knocked out or anything. Plus, they've got a fairly easy enough schedule. They've got the Giants and the Raiders, and then, the Cowboys, which I don't know how that game will go now. Where, they could win out, or they could go 2-1 and keep the Vikings back to the second seed, and they may be good enough to win that game. But it does make it much more likely that the Vikings, even if they are the second seed, will host the conference championship game if they get there. So yeah, no, that's a pretty good point. And it would allow the Vikings to have home field advantage for the entire postseason, which would be dope as hell.
It's time for some breaking news, kids. Are you ready for some breaking news? I'm ready for some breaking news. We have mentioned throughout the season that the Norse Code Fantasy League is the dumbest thing that you can possibly do involving the internet that's not like swatting people. And I have managed to go. I've managed to have a perfect season throughout this.
It's true.
Yeah, it's perfect. I am happy that it is perfect. I did not want to beat Don from Ohio this week, who has just been spending the entirety of this season making fun of me for my terrible record, which I have had. My team, my draft might as well be like the all IR team. I'm still pissed off about that. I was literally half a yard away from defeating Don from Ohio before the refs called that the Amendola touchdown was not or that Amendola was down at the 1 instead of a touchdown. In the closing seconds of the game, I hate everything, especially Don from Ohio. It really is the best fantasy game that you can possibly play. This is just so stupid.
This does this make you the 1976 Bucks or the 2008 Detroit Lions?
Yeah, we had this conversation in the pre-show about which one do you refer to? Do you refer to the newer version or the old version? Like if the Browns go winless this season, do you refer to someone as, oh, you can be like the Browns a couple of years ago, or do you still bring up the famous case of the Lions? I think it still counts as the Lions because nobody cares about the creamsicle Bucks.
Right. Well, okay, so I think it's always the newer one because we know for a fact that, so if the Browns do it, it's going to be the Browns. But we know for a fact, right, that had the Patriots, I'm saying it's a fact, I'm speculating, but we all kind of agree that if the Patriots had actually gone undefeated in 2007, we'd talk about them and not the friggin' 1972 Dolphins. No. We'd be like, yeah, he's the greatest team of all time. They went undefeated. The only team to go undefeated in a 16, whatever, right? We talk about them. We wouldn't talk about the 1972 Dolphins.
And Mercury Morris could just die and go on to back to living in obscurity.
Yeah, relive your World Football League days, Mercury. But yeah, no one talks about the 1976 Bucks. They were a worse team than the Lions, but the Lions went 0-16 recently. Yeah. The Bucks went 0-14 in 76. And so, yeah, if the Browns do it, I think it's going to be the Browns. And I think you should be proud.
I should be proud
to share something with a historic franchise like the Browns, who won the AAFC championship, I believe, in 1954.
Yeah, this is just awful, wrong, and I hate everything. And I'm experiencing nothing but heartache. Speaking of heartache, let's talk about Hayden's question, which is, would you rather have the heartache we had before the season, started with Teddy last year, or have it now at 11-2 like the Eagles?
Sorry. Would I rather have Teddy go out at the beginning of the season, or rather have like this,
or rather him be an MVP candidate and then go out at 11-2?
Having experienced the first, I might rather the second. If only because, I'd be like, I was right about Teddy, but it's sad. But I was right, but it's sad.
I was right, but he's hurt, and it's bad. Yeah,
you're right. This so is at least I get the benefit of like having concrete evidence versus like being like, no, based off of my study of, the types of numbers that matter and the film traits that he possesses, I think that Teddy's really good. It would be like definitive, right? That Bridgewater would be good. So I guess I'd rather have that. Plus, I feel like it's not as if it's a wasted season because, I like that, both the Eagles and the Vikings can say, well, that defense is good enough. Maybe it'll carry them through the playoffs. So, it still creates that possibility of, winning, because the playoffs are like super weird. Look at both Giants teams that won. Like I think they were both wild card teams when they won. We've seen other wild card teams make it and win. I think the Ravens were a wild card team. The playoffs are weird. But it's not the regular season. You were done at the beginning of the season, right? When Teddy went out. So you can be like, yeah, the playoffs are like super dumb. This is great. I think I'd rather do the other one because there's still like hope. And here's the thing, if you get your teeth kicked out, you're like, yeah, okay, fine. Next year though, whereas next year when we know the team is going to be good plus more. Whereas when Teddy went out, you were like, I think the team will be good and Teddy will be back, which that's good. And you just never really, it was just kind of slow burn. If the season ends, it ends quickly. And like literally ends quickly, not like you don't no longer have to hope or worry about it.
Yeah.
There's only like 3 more games of misery if things are bad, as opposed to 16. So yeah, I'd much rather the second.
Yeah. Boy, it just feels a bit like the Oakland team last year, with Derek Carr going out, or in years past when horrible tragedies at the quarterback positions would just start to plague Houston or Arizona, and just knock their quarterback out. Now they're in total disarray, and they're pushing out, Blaine Gabbert now.
Oh, Jesus.
Is that they're talking? There have been rumors on the Twitterverse about giving him an extension.
Extension.
There have been rumors. I cannot substantiate these things. I can only say that people who have been right before on Twitter are saying it.
That's wild. Yeah. Is it because he had such a good revenge game against the Jaguars? Is that it? That
probably has something to do with it. Or they just realized that Carson Palmer's not coming back next year.
Yeah, that's what the draft is. Whatever.
It's going to be a situation like the Bears had this year, where they signed Gabbert for 3 years, $75 million, and then they go and draft a quarterback with like the 4th pick or whatever that they traded up for. And then they're going to be stuck there going, well, I hope Gabbert enjoys all of the millions we're paying him to sit on the bench, because we are going to be starting our draft pick.
Right, right. One quarterback you failed to mention that's probably just as devastating as Derek Carr for the Raiders last year, Carson Wentz for the Eagles this year, Christian Ponder in 2012.
You're right.
He led the team.
I had forgotten about Christian
Ponder. He led the team to the playoffs and tragically was injured right before they could play the Green Bay Packers. I mean, what bigger quarterback loss could there have been?
Well, I feel like we used to say something about Christian Ponder, but I just can't seem to remember what it was. It'll probably come to me by the end of the show.
If we had said it more often, we'd probably remember it, but maybe we just didn't say it often enough.
Possible. Call Me Kelso on Twitter asks, I hate to go all QB injury sky is falling for Philly. On the other hand, Nick Foles is bad. Do they sign you-know-who and try to have him ready for the playoffs? No.
It's interesting. Well, no. But if it was any team, it would be the Eagles, because the Eagles are woke as hell.
Yeah.
But
I have a feeling if Chip Kelly was still there, Chip Kelly as a GM would try to push it.
Yeah. And Lurie is like might be the most liberal owner. So like he might just be like, yeah, okay. So like, maybe.
What's the worst that could happen? The president calls an airstrike at the link.
But I mean, I don't think so. It's also way too late in the season.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not going to happen.
That dude is collecting year-end awards right now and showering his money in different locations to different groups of people who can use it.
And suing the NFL.
Yeah. Although, according to ESPN, he would drop his lawsuit if he were to be signed by Philadelphia.
That makes sense, given that the premise of the lawsuit is that teams refuse to sign him.
Yeah, that is kind of the obvious thing there, isn't it?
Right. But yeah, it is a different kind of situation than like with the Houston Texans. Bob McNair is like famously like conservative, and Lurie is like
and got
famously
himself and ended up with his foot in his mouth this season, at least twice.
Yes. Oh boy. But yeah, you would imagine like McNair would say no, but Howie Lurie may say yes.
Yeah.
But I still don't think it's going to happen. It's way too late in the season, and there's a bunch of stuff involved. So no. But hey, also side note, hey, everyone talks about how Nick Foles sucks, and everyone just kind of assumes that he sucks, and everyone says that he sucks. And remember that year that he had that was a huge outlier, in 2013. And everyone was like, well, there's no way that could be that huge of an outlier. He was just playing well that season. And some people said, hey, the tape doesn't match the stats. And they were right. And maybe give some people some leeway when they say the same thing about other former Jeff Fisher quarterbacks having outlier years. I don't know. I'm just.
I feel like this is going to be the premise for an article.
Maybe. Maybe I kind of wrote a version of that article secretly when I was actually talking about contracts. When I talked about all of the flash in the pan quarterbacks that massively outperformed their performance up until that point and got big contracts. I didn't say how those quarterbacks did after they got those contracts.
No,
but everyone knows that Josh McCown is no golden stallion. Like, yeah. Oh, by the way, rip Josh McCown.
Yeah, that is also too bad. If we're going to mention QBs going down, we should also mention Josh McCown and his hand.
That was a fun Jets team, which I never say.
Yeah, it was.
That was pretty. He was doing
better
really
than
fun
expected.
Stuff.
Yeah. Darn shame. Executive producer Kyle Slabby asks, when is it going to be Teddy time, and why can't I have nice things?
Week 17, and maybe that's it.
Yeah.
And maybe not week 17 anymore, because if the Eagles lose out, which is possible, the Vikings may be playing for the number 1 seed.
It is very possible. Don from Ohio asks, should the Vikings sign Rashad Hill to a long-term deal, draft another offensive tackle, and trade Remmers in the offseason? I feel like eating the dead cap space on Remmers is a smart play if he can only play half a season.
That's like 4 games, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a quarter of a season. It sounds like he's going to play.
Well, I believe this is under the assumption that he's not going to end up playing for the rest of the season.
Well, if he's not going to play for the rest of the season, then like think about it for sure. But I wouldn't get rid of him. He played really well when he was healthy. Also, it was 2 separate injuries. I don't like that. That's weird. I don't think like you'd have to tell me that
it'd have to be a Sharif
good
Floyd
evidence
situation.
that he's like prone to concussions or something.
Yeah,
which like is a thing, but it's not as much of a thing as can be easily figured out from one concussion.
No, or the Sharif Floyd situation where he is injured and it's just mysterious as to why he's continually just like not able to get better.
Right.
Also from Don from Ohio, have either of you regifted before? And if so, did the person know it was a regift?
Yeah. I have. Sort of. I mean, I regifted a gift that was given to my girlfriend. We decided to give it to my brother, who doesn't listen to this podcast.
Who does not believe football happens.
Right. But it doesn't matter. I think we told him it was a regift. If we didn't, he would find it funny. But he really enjoyed the gift. It was like a sushi kit or something. It was a sushi kit. It was actually pretty nice. The only problem was we had to open up the box beforehand. We hadn't opened it when we decided to regift it, but we had to open up the box beforehand because we were traveling by plane and it had rice wine vinegar in it. And you can't carry the liquid. So we had to open it up, but it was still a good gift. He loved it. He's used it. That's the only instance I can think of. I'm sure I've done it before. When I was in high school, I found a necklace somewhere. I just found a necklace. I didn't steal it, although that's what it sounds like now.
You found it on someone and decided it needed to be yours.
Yeah,
you found it at a debate meet.
Right. So I found a necklace, and it was such that like I don't think I could have reasonably found a way to like return it because I like found it at my house after like a party or something, and it was like a party that like my parents threw, so I didn't know anybody there and I don't really want to talk to those people. So found a necklace and I gifted that necklace to my girlfriend a couple weeks later for an anniversary. I don't think I told her that.
I forget. Does your girlfriend think that football is real? Let's.
Oh, she definitely doesn't listen to this podcast. So.
Sweet. The fun thing about having a kid is that for like birthdays or like right when the kid is born, you receive a just myriad of random presents and gifts and trinkets.
Oh, wow. I know where this is going. That's smart.
Yeah. So, and it seems like whenever you have a kid, these things happen in bunches in groups of friends. So you have things that you just never used. And even if you're not that great at writing down like the name of the person who gave it to you, so you don't have to worry about like regifting it to them when they have a kid. Luckily, the woman who is pregnant that you're going to be giving the gift to has pregnancy brain, which is a thing, and they will totally forget they ever bought it. So you can give them that onesie that your kid was never big enough for or never small enough for and just move it on down the line there. Like I think I gave one of my best friends, Sam, who I believe listens to the show, and he knows this was a regift. I think I gave him every stitch of clothing my kid had from like newborn to like 3. Because he was about to have a kid. We weren't going to have another. Like, hey, you can have all of this. I'm positive you gave me some of this.
Oh, yeah, that's perfect.
No, it's especially when kids are involved, regifting is totally fine.
Yeah. Those are the only 2 instances I can remember, though, for me.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else. I think just kid involved is as far as back as I can go. Probably due to pregnancy brain. I'm just going to... I got sympathy pregnancy brain out of that.
Sympathy pregnancy brain, right.
Which sadly is also a thing. Rob asks, in what ways is Bell a superior tight end to Bucky Hodges?
I don't know if you're asking like it's a trap and you're like, I knew Bucky Hodges was better, or you're genuinely asking why is Bell on the roster and Bucky Hodges isn't. And I don't know. I don't know what you're asking. Or why you're asking, I guess. So I guess I should try to answer this earnestly as possible. I don't know. He has
Bucky Hodges is just a better name. Why can't he be on the roster?
Not only is it a better name in its current form, his real name is also better because his real name is Temujin, which is the same name that Genghis Khan has. So, wow, right? Amazing name.
I'm kind of upset that he was cut.
Yeah, now I'm upset.
No, this is the last straw.
Before he was the Winter Soldier, but then he became Genghis Khan. Like,
yeah, I
But yeah, I assume Blake Bell is better for. You've got a little bit of weird versatility. He can throw the ball in like trick plays and stuff like that. You've got him on your special teams units, and if you make him the punt protector, he can receive the ball and throw it, which is kind of cool. He is athletic. It's not as if they replaced an athlete with a non-athlete, but I would still wager that Bucky Hodges is like more of an athlete. I'm guessing Bell is more versatile and takes to coaching better. Like that's what I assume is the case. And so that's probably relevant.
It's entirely possible. Let's go to 53 Strong, who asks, what is it with the Keenum MVP discussion that was started and the obsession with him, with giving him excuses that Teddy was never afforded?
Yeah, that is one thing that I find kind of interesting, is that a lot of the people that are arguing that, Keenum had good performances when he didn't, or isolating the instances when he did have genuinely good performances, are providing context for those discussions that they refuse to provide in context for discussions about Bridgewater. And that's definitely not true of a lot of people that think Keenum has been playing well. A lot of people who think Keenum has been playing well are also fans of Teddy Bridgewater, and will acknowledge, kind of a lot of the obstacles that Bridgewater had to go through that Keenum didn't, or we'll talk about those obstacles and also acknowledge that Bridgewater did. But there's definitely a contingent of people that will give Keenum latitude for things that were magnified or similar to what Bridgewater had to do, and he's not given kind of the same latitude. That's kind of upsetting. Like if you talk about like, hey, Keenum was pressured a lot in this game. Like, yeah, I mean, welcome to Teddy's life, right? Like if you're talking about sort of like one-to-one comparisons, Keenum in this game dealing with a lot of similar problems, and he still had a better receiving core. But dealing with a lot of similar problems that Bridgewater did throughout the 2015 season, put up worse numbers in this game than Bridgewater did for a season. Not that you can compare in-game numbers to season-long numbers, but if you wanted to say, hey, let's talk about these two drives that Keenum had that were really good. And I should actually also mention, I kept on mentioning two really good drives. The other drive where Adam Thielen, I think, ran the ball 54 yards for a touchdown. When I initially watched it, I was tempted to say, I think I did. I don't know if I did, but I was tempted to say it was all Thielen. Keenum shouldn't deserve credit for the touchdown and kind of inflates his statistics. And that's not true. That entire drive, I thought, he did a pretty good job. He was passing a little bit too short early, but that pass to Thielen was genuinely spectacular. It was a really tight window. He had perfect timing on it, threw it to the only place that Thielen had exclusive access to the ball. Thielen was able to turn and run, get a touchdown. Now, maybe if you wanted to divide credit, Keenum doesn't get all 54 yards, but I should mention that was actually really good. So that touchdown drive, Keenum gets get good grades for, not like average, and we shouldn't say that Thielen was kind of doing it all. Right. So let's add another drive to that, I guess. But we'll say, hey, the receivers dropped the ball, right? And it's like, yeah, I mean, that happened a lot to Teddy when he was throwing to friggin' Charles Johnson and Cordero Patterson. And rookie Stephon Diggs, who wasn't even available for the first 4 weeks of the season because he was behind, I guess, Charles Johnson on the depth chart, and also suffered injuries throughout the season. So like, Bridgewater had, not a studly cast of receivers, and he had, in my opinion, a much worse offensive line. And he was hamstrung by much, much worse play calling, which, Keenum wasn't. So, if you wanted to make these numbers comparisons, we can talk about, hey, this is what Keenum looks like when things are going wrong for him. His numbers look even worse than you'd have expected. And Bridgewater consistently had those wrong things happen, and his numbers look better. So, that's maybe fair. I don't think that you can correct for all the variables in like in an intellectually honest way. So I don't want to compare those numbers. I'd rather just compare the traits.
Next question. what do you think it will take for fans and media to evaluate QBs better instead of raw stats and wow throws?
What would it take? I don't know if there's anything to
like
it.
An analytic explosion, like
maybe. I would imagine. I guess one thing would be if the Browns did well this season, which that sounds like a pretty difficult ask. But
we had high hopes for the numbers' sake.
But yeah, if the Browns did well this season and they didn't feel like they were forced to fire Sashi Brown, which again, I think they probably should have fired Hugh Jackson and not Sashi Brown, but whatever, right? It's not as if Sashi was doing just an incredible job, right? Like, so I mean, they got a bunch of players that are kind of interesting. So maybe he was, but for the most part, it's not as if it's not justifiable to fire him. But if he had acquired a bunch of good players, especially if he had acquired a good quarterback, and he mentioned, hey, advanced analytics is how I found this quarterback, especially if it was a quarterback that not many people had heard of. Like if he was like, yeah, I found Dak Prescott in the 4th round using #analytics. And I knew that it wasn't smart to go in the 1st and 2nd round for these guys because I could get a much better value in Dak Prescott. Like if he had done that, I think, people would have paid a lot more attention. That's a big ask, right? Because even sort of the best sort of advanced statistical tools, they can only give us like probabilities. Like probably this player is going to overperform his draft position, but it's not as if analytics are superior or so superior to trait-based film scouting. If they are superior at all, it's not as if they're so superior that they can consistently identify 3rd and 4th round gems. They give you advantages in those rounds, but they don't like find 1st round quarterbacks in the 4th round. But that would be an example. But I think more to that would just be if coaches and GMs mentioned kind of that they were using advanced statistics to find the players and they were successful, right? So, if I don't even remember who the general manager for the Eagles is right now. But if he said that or something along those lines, that would probably help. Like, yeah, we knew that, it was difficult to evaluate Carson Wentz statistically because he, went to an FCS school. But, using kind of our numbers nerds we have in the front office, we were able to account for that. And this is what we can like. That would be, a good way to do it. Even better is if a former successful general manager, say like a proto Bill Polian that didn't leave after a disastrous season, mentioned that like, oh yeah, I got all these great players because, we were really strong in analytics, which to some extent is what the Seahawks do. So, maybe then they could inject that into the media conversation as a media member. But I think for the most part, there's not a lot that would have big media do a better job of focusing on sort of the correct statistics, quote unquote correct statistics for evaluating quarterbacks. I will say, though, over the past 10 years, they've done a tremendous job of improving their coverage of quarterbacks. It's much rarer that we see quarterbacks evaluated by total passing yardage in the media. Fans will still do it a lot, but we don't see it as much. We still see it, but we don't see it as much. And total yard statistics are being kind of eschewed in favor of rate statistics. And that's not something we saw 10 years ago. If you go back, 20 years ago and look at, because I did this for an article about, which quarterback that has gone to the Hall of Fame or will go to the Hall of Fame does Bridgewater best compare to if we only limit our selection to Hall of Fame quarterbacks. That article I thought was really fun to write. And I had to keep on clarifying. I don't think Bridgewater is going to go to the Hall of Fame. I just want to see sort of if he is, what does that trajectory look like? Which quarterbacks is he closest to? And I did that for a couple of young quarterbacks too. So it wasn't just Bridgewater. But one of the things I ended up going through was going through press clippings of Drew Brees' rookie season, which, wasn't very significant, but, sophomore season, Peyton Manning's rookie season in like 1998. And the way they talked about Peyton Manning, it was exactly kind of the worst examples of misusing statistics and evaluating. They only really talked about total passing yards. And they like conceded that he threw some interceptions. But if they had evaluated him from like a rate statistic perspective, they wouldn't have mentioned him as having improved, I think, in the second half of the season because he was throwing for more yards per game, because they would have also mentioned that he was, throwing more attempts in each game. And he didn't really improve from a rate statistic perspective in his rookie year. There's a lot of good signs. You know, he performed at like a league average level, I think, by adjusted net yards per attempt. And that's really, really good for a rookie and stuff like that. But they were talking about him in ways that we don't talk about him now. Even Sam Bradford's rookie year, when he won, I think, Offensive Rookie of the Year in 2008, which, over 10 years ago. Or 10 years ago, I should say, not over, almost exactly. But 10 years ago, they gave it to him because he, I think, led the league in yardage or set a rookie record for quarterback passing yardage. His rate statistics were bad, and he never really improved on it. But he led the league in passing attempts, and no one really accounted for that. So we're much better talking about quarterbacks now than we were 10 years ago, and especially 20 years ago. So eventually we'll get there, but I don't think any one thing is going to kind of leapfrog us there unless something extraordinary happens, like the Browns get good, or
I feel like if the Browns get good is your bellwether, like your mark of success. Boy, you've got
a long time to wait.
Yeah, that jersey is just going to keep on getting names.
Right, exactly.
Next question. Dave Booga Peters asks, the starting quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings in week 1 of the 2018 season will be...
Oh, man.
Johnny Manziel. What the hell? He's training for a comeback. He's also got a dad bod now.
Bully for him. Usually cocaine makes you lose weight.
You would think.
I would say probably Case Keenum. And that's optimism because it means that he did well in the playoffs, right?
Yeah. So, it would be much more difficult to let Case Keenum get signed by somebody else if he went further in the playoffs. Final question, and I'll answer this question for our co-host as well, who is not here. Kenneth Allen asks, when are you seeing the new Star Wars movie?
Let me ask real quick. Hold on.
While Arif is asking, I will likely be
see the new Star Wars movie. The day after it comes out. I will likely be seeing it the week that it comes out. For whatever reason, it's well documented on this show that Dusty hates Star Wars. For whatever reason, Dusty and Todd go to Star Wars movies. Like, often when they come out, like shortly after they come out, just so Dusty has like all the ammo in the world to come out and just like guns a-blazing talk about how much he hates it. So Dusty will likely see it the week it comes out, if not the day it comes out. I don't even know if Todd likes Star Wars. I think he just likes seeing Dusty like passionate about something other than bartending and drinking. He just wants to feel alive, okay?
Dusty just wants to numb the pain of being alive. And
he goes to Star Wars shows to make fun of all those nerds and also tell them that Star Trek is better.
Yeah, that is Dusty to a T. That is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Dusty and Arif will be back later in the week to discuss all things Bengals. Do you have anything to plug before we wrap up?
I don't have any articles planned. I'll probably do a thing justifying my take on Case Keenum.
You've had enough of it on Twitter. We're taking this to cut. We're taking this to. We're taking this online. Darn it. We're taking this to the blogs.
Take it to the blogs.
Indeed. So that is going to be it for Norse Code for this episode. If you have enjoyed Norse Code and would like to donate money to keep the show ad-free and keep us on the air, you can do so at patreon.com/Norse Code or paypal.me/Norse Code. We'll be back in just a couple days. So for Arif, for Dusty, my name is James. Thank you so much for listening. And despite the loss, demand excellence. Demand Norse Code. And we will see you later this week.
Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, or wherever else fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, who can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. Our intrepid producer and occasional co-host James Pogachnik can be found on Twitter at Big Mono or curating the official Norse Code Twitter feed at Norse Code DN. I'm your host with a firm grasp of the obvious, Dusty O'Connell, and my name is my handle on Twitter. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, your one-time donation can be made at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Please visit our website, norsecodepodcast.com, where you'll find links to our Facebook and YouTube pages, along with the episode archive and some other good stuff. And any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be emailed to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. And on behalf of the entire Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.